So you might have seen those headlines recently about a coalition of the willing meeting in Paris, all about Ukraine.
Yeah.
But what went down there, and why should anyone really care?
Well, we're going to unpack all that
Yeah.
in this deep dive. We're going to look at some of the key stuff that came out of that summit and the tensions bubbling under the surface. We're basing all this on a really interesting first post analysis. The big takeaway is that Europe wants a seat at the table when it comes to negotiating peace in Ukraine, those talks that have been going on, led by the U.S. and Saudi Arabia.
Right.
But there are questions about how they're going about getting that influence. This Paris meeting was co-chaired by the French President, Emmanuel Macron, and the British Prime Minister, Keir Starmer.
Okay.
And it's interesting because this wasn't an EU meeting, of course. The UK is not part of that anymore. So it's this separate group, this coalition of the willing, forming.
Right.
They say their goal is all about supporting Ukraine, making sure they're in a strong position when peace talks eventually, hopefully, happen. But is that what's really going on?
Okay, so is Europe's strategy working? I mean, are more sanctions and military aid really the answer? Are they actually getting Europe that place at the negotiating table they want?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
It's understandable why Europe wants to be involved in those crucial peace talks, right?
Sure.
They've poured tons of money into supporting Ukraine, billions and billions, in humanitarian aid, military aid.
Yeah, we're talking jets, tanks, arms, ammunition, the whole 9 yards.
Exactly. So, of course, they want to have a say in how things shake out. Makes sense. You invest that much, you want to be in the room where it happens.
Absolutely. So what came out of this summit then? What's the plan? More of the same?
Well, basically, yes.
Yeah.
Two big things they emphasized. Keeping those sanctions on Russia going, maybe even cranking them up.
Right.
There were quotes about needing complete clarity, that now is not the time for lifting sanctions. They even talked about, how we can increase sanctions, and then, of course, more military support for Ukraine. Keir Starmer and Zelensky both talked about new aid packages and how much they appreciated them. But here's the thing. The first post analyst is pretty skeptical. They're basically saying this is the same old after 3 years of war. They even ask, and I'm quoting here, "I'm sure Russia's ready to give up any second now. It will take just one more sanction or one more missile from Ukraine." Are we really expecting different results by doing the same thing over and over again? It's almost, well, they use the word ludicrous.
Yeah, that classic definition of insanity, right? Doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results.
Exactly.
So other than just more of the same, was there anything new that came out of this summit?
Yeah, actually, one interesting thing. A Franco-British military initiative. Macron and Keir Starmer agreed to send a joint team, to Ukraine.
Huh, a joint team. What will they be doing there?
Their job is to basically work with Ukraine on what their army should look like in the future, help them structure their forces.
Ah, I see. But the first post analyst had a bit of a different take on this, didn't they? Something about hoping Ukraine won't even need a big army.
Right. They said if peace actually happens, hopefully Ukraine won't need a massive army.
Right.
So, maybe instead of focusing on bolstering Ukraine's forces to put pressure on Moscow, maybe that time has passed. Maybe it's time to really focus on the peace angle.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about. It's like, are we planning for a future where the conflict continues?
Yeah.
Or are we putting all our efforts into ending it? And all of this is happening, of course, against a global backdrop that's shifting pretty dramatically. The analyst brought up this point about how the old certainties, like Europe always having the U.S. in their corner, that might not be so certain anymore.
Absolutely. And that plays a big role in their overall argument.
So the analyst actually said Trump's America seems more in sync with Russia than Europe, which is quite a statement.
Right. And the worry is that Europe isn't really seeing this, or maybe they're just choosing to ignore it, hoping things will go back to the way they were, with the U.S. automatically backing them up.
Did Macron address that at all?
Yeah, actually, he had this interesting statement where he said, "It's very clear that everything we agree for the future should be with the United States a part of it." And he went on to say, this also means the U.S. shares responsibility with us for the security of Ukraine and for peace and security in Europe. So he's clearly thinking about the U.S. role in all of this. And he also mentioned NATO, that whole collective security idea.
Right. Germany's outgoing Chancellor Olaf Scholz, he also talked about this, didn't he?
Yeah, Schultz, the one who lost the election and is kind of waiting to retire, he actually called for the U.S. Specifically, he seemed to be talking about a possible future with Trump back in charge. He called for them to take responsibility, for Ukraine's safety and security. He also talked about NATO and how important it is. But the analyst was pretty critical of this, saying that maybe Germany should focus on what they're doing before they start lecturing the U.S. about their responsibility.
Oh,
It's like, are you really in a position to be pointing fingers when maybe your own contributions are being questioned?
right. So what's the bottom line here? Is Europe just out of touch with reality?
Well, the analyst's argument is that Europe may not be seeing the big picture, that the old world order is gone and they need to adjust. The analyst says just sticking with sanctions, they call it saber rattling, and staying in our comfort zone isn't going to cut it. If they want to be taken seriously, if they want that seat at the negotiating table, they need to do more, think outside the box.
So to sum up this whole Paris summit thing, Europe really wants to be a major player in the Ukraine peace talks. And that makes sense given everything they've invested. But their strategy, basically just more sanctions and more military aid, plus this new Franco-British team to help with the Ukrainian army, it's all being questioned,
Yeah,
especially with the global situation changing, with the U.S., maybe not being the reliable ally they used to be.
exactly. Two big things came out of this summit: a commitment to ramp up sanctions and this plan to send a Franco-British team to Ukraine. But the big question is, will any of that actually get Russia to negotiate? And will it get Europe the influence they want? That's what the analyst is skeptical about.
Right. So as you think about all of this, ask yourself, is this coalition of the willing really the answer for Europe, or are they just stuck in their old ways doing what they've always done while the world around them changes?
It's a good question.
Yeah.
And given all these changes in global politics, what other strategies could Europe try? What would actually work to bring peace to Ukraine and also make sure Europe's interests are protected in the long run? That's something to think about.
Absolutely. Lots to ponder. Thanks for breaking it all down for us.
You're welcome. It was my pleasure.
And to all our listeners out there, keep those questions coming. We'll be back soon with another deep dive.
See you then.
Bye.